welcome to Frank Words. Today's episode is the sixth one in a series called Your Story. We're examining some of those universal topics that are included in mine and yours and everybody's story in some way or other. And our theme for today is mentors and teachers. We're going to be looking at folks who show us the way, and they may have done that now or in the past. They've given us counsel, taught us skills, coached us in practices, served as our models, helped us figure out who we are and what our path is. I'm delighted to have with me today the Very Reverend James A. Kowalski. Jim and I have known each other since 1979, when he was a new priest serving Trinity Church Episcopal in Newtown, Connecticut, and I had been called to Trinity as rector. So he mentored me for, well, the entire time I was there, but more about that later. We'll no doubt tell you some of our shared story and what we learned together and what we did as a team. Jim recently retired from 40 years of active ministry in the Episcopal Church, the last 15 of which he led as dean the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Jim's a member of the American Leadership Forum and is, I love this, an Aspen Institute Crown Fellow. That's my guess. Thank you, Jim. Our aim today is to give you a chance to think about the people in your own life who've helped shape you. Whether you're young or old or someplace in between, you're probably serving as somebody's mentor or teacher right now, though you might not fully be aware of it. So maybe this conversation will provide you with a greater understanding of not only who your mentors have been and what they've taught you, who've been your teachers, but how you can be an effective teacher or mentor yourself. So, Jim, it's really good to have you here. Thanks for being with us, and it's nice to have you. So, tell us a bit about yourself to start off with.
Well, you gave me a nice introduction, so I think I'll jump right in and tell you why I was drawn to this topic, and not just as an excuse to spend time with you. I somewhat late in my life, I guess, and it was really in my 30s, came to an appreciation of how lonely I was. Even though before that, I think if you'd asked me, I would have said that wasn't much of a factor. I had a lot of people in my life that I thought were supportive. I had teachers. My high school and other schools may not have been the best. I grew up in Eastern Connecticut where, there wasn't a lot of money. Eventually went to a private college. Trinity in Hartford had some really great teachers. But I didn't realize that teaching would become very different for me than what I would call mentoring. A lot of my teachers didn't help with my loneliness. I was terrified of them. I was scared of failing. I wanted to do well. I often couldn't deal with the shame I felt if I didn't live up to my own expectations, really, but what seemed like their standards, their goals, their grades. I was always looking for the top grade. I wanted to excel. And so it took me a long time to figure out what is mentoring for me, and could I be a mentor for others? Which doesn't mean I didn't want to learn. It didn't mean I didn't want teachers. What it meant was I also wanted to be clear about what mentoring is. Mm-hmm. That was a process over the next 30 or 35 years of understanding what it takes to be not even a coach, really more like a tugboat for people, mm-hmm. and to let people be that for me.
Wow. And going back for just a second, how was this specifically an answer or a part of the question of the loneliness you spoke of a minute ago?
Well, I'll give you an example. I had a teacher in high school, my freshman year, who said, you can be in this high division if 3 weeks into the class you take this grammar exam we're going to give everybody, and you get at least a 90 on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had goofed around all the years before, talking my way through classes and not doing my homework until the night before, and certainly not studying grammar or anything like that. This teacher said, if you don't know grammar, you can't be in this high division, and we're going to give you a test in 3 weeks. So I had to work my tail off.
Mm-hmm.
But I was terrified. I mean, in some ways, she gave me a gift because I had to wake up, I had to work hard. For those early years, I thought, well, that was a good thing. She was a good teacher, but I felt enormous shame because I had goofed around the years before. I felt terrific shame that I might fail, that I might get kicked out of that high division because I couldn't get the 90. And that was, as I reflected upon that, I later in my life, because as a freshman in high school, that just seemed normal to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Later,
right.
I look back at it and think, wow, I'm mostly driven by a need to do well and by being terrified of failure, wanting to impress people, wanting to get the good grade, do whatever the person in charge expects of me, all that kind of stuff. And it was an enormous amount of pressure. I was scared and felt lonely most of the time.
Ah, I see. I see. Thanks for clarifying that. Well, go back just a little before all of that began to gel and so forth. Um, all of us, I think, have to say that our very first teachers and mentors, whether they were positive or negative influences, another matter entirely, were our parents or parent figures and so forth. And of course, you maybe the teacher that you just spoke of was such a person. But can you think of others? And I guess what I'm getting at here is none of us, or very few, get out of adolescence and upbringing without a whole lot of baggage that we carry that comes from the particular parenting that we had. Nobody gets perfect mirroring as a child, and so we all grow up with the capacity and the reality of shame and deficits and so on. Talk to us a little bit about what what do you how do you assess the early parenting figures in your life, parents or others?
Well, my parents were excellent role models in some ways because they worked very hard. They obviously cared about us as kids. They sacrificed a lot. Um, my father worked multiple jobs at times to make ends meet and give us what I didn't realize at the time, but was pretty classically the middle class life in America in the 60s. Um, but there was an enormous amount of pressure to do well, and especially in school to get grades, all that kind of go on to college. I would be the first with my older brother. We were the first in the family to go to college. And again, I don't mean to be critical of that, but it was, you've got to do it or you failed. And only later when I became a parent did I realize how true it was to say, you don't get a course in parenting. You don't, so my parents, in the sense that I might equate good parenting with good mentoring. Of course, there's an element of teaching in
Sure.
both or in all of those, but a good parent and a good mentor are similar in the sense that they don't just help create the pressure to motivate you to success. And I guess a lot of people will look. I mean, certainly with my growing up community, I was looked at as a successful kid, the golden boy of Willimantic, Connecticut, whatever that means, and went on to get a lot of awards and go on special things like Boys Nation or whatever, Eagle Scout, all that stuff. Again, I'm not saying that wasn't important. It was wildly formative to me, but it didn't address this other need I had, which was addressed by good mentoring, which was how do you encourage somebody to find out who they really are, to take risks, to try things knowing that they might fail, and to break this terrible isolation by learning that it's not only okay to ask for help, but by asking for help, you not only learn things you would never learn if you didn't involve other people, but you give them the benefit of helping you and also maybe learning something they didn't know about themselves or about the situation, the problem, or whatever that you're trying to solve.
Well,
So
you're singing my song, and I don't want to sidetrack into something that really is kind of a tangent to this conversation. But what you just said about being able to ask for help and being able to accept it, is, it seems to me, a key element that is counter to the messaging that overtly or covertly a lot of young men and boys get in growing up. You got to be on your own. You got to do this by yourself, and so forth. Now, I'm not saying that that's global, but I think it is pervasive to some extent. Um, and I don't have a lot of that. You know, I frequently tell people, look, I do a lot of things poorly, and I do a whole lot of things mediocrely. But I do one thing exceedingly well. I'm an expert at admitting I don't know something and asking somebody, who does know. And I look at that as a gift. I really do. And
it
I'm
is.
not exaggerating. I think I'm not, I know I do a lot of things well too, but that's something I really, really depend on. He listens to this podcast, so we're not going to be breaking any confidences here, but you remember our mutual friend, Tom Switz. Tom's one of my mentors. And when he and I went on a mission trip, when we were at Trinity, in fact, down to West Virginia, um, we did some rehabbing of a house, and Tom's an expert carpenter. He was in those days, and he's a lot of other things as well. But he taught me how to do things I'd never ever learned, like how to hang wallboard, how to break it, etc. I I love that. I love working with somebody who's teaching me stuff I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to sidetrack into
And
that too far, but
he's the kind of teacher who wants you to learn so you can do it.
precisely.
Not just so you can do a job he wants done, or so you can help him. So it's so you can be independent, assuming you want to do mission work, and that mission work is going to include, let's say, helping people get a house that they could live in, and you want to help build it. Um, to your earlier point about being expert at asking for help, one of the reasons I think we had the kind of relationship we had at Trinity, because you were some years older than I, certainly much more experienced. I had, as you mentioned,
Older, but not necessarily wiser.
well, you often said that, and that empowered me not only to ask for your help, but to give you feedback. You would often ask for feedback. I remember, at least this is how I remember, maybe it's not accurate. You would often say, well, why the hell would they do or say that damn thing? It would be a phrase that I remember fondly, because it empowered me to imagine with you, well, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody say that? What's going on? And the two of us would try to understand the situation. That the truth was, neither of us understood. Now, maybe we didn't get it right because it was about the inner workings of somebody else's mind or spirit or who knows, but trying to be their pastors, trying to be leaders,
Yeah.
clergy leaders of a congregation that was, I dare say, thriving while we were there. We were saying to each other, I don't know. Why don't we brainstorm on this? Why don't we imagine this together or reimagine this thing? And as a younger guy, and I wasn't that much younger than you, but certainly I was less experienced. I had been, frankly, with a priest before you, without going into names, who was he would hold things very close to his vest. He would tell me to go visit people, but he wouldn't tell me anything about them. And then delight in the fact that I'd come back and not know what he knew, or have gotten myself into some kind of odd conversation with them because I had no idea what was really going on with them. Not that I don't think he was trying to set me up. The fact of the matter is he already knew he was going to be leaving. And I think he was struggling with that.
Yeah.
So that my first experience of work of a job, where that was my first job as a newly ordained person, was to work with somebody that it wasn't that I didn't trust him. It's that I knew I couldn't get any of the information from him that was going to empower me to do my job, if that
Well,
makes sense.
I think you're hitting on something that's really key to me. And it comes in a lot of forms. I have actually, I want to say two things. Number one is the people who've mentored us usually are the ones who shape us, either to be different from who they were, or to emulate who they were and what they did, and so on. I had a marvelous mentor, and the first guy I assisted when I was newly ordained. It was my first position, and so forth. And I've continued to give thanks for that. But there were a lot of other people too. I was a part of a network of Charlotte, North Carolina, Episcopal clergy, and there were some outstanding guys in there, and all of them were a decade or two older than I. I was in my late 20s at the time, mid 20s really, um, and they were all in their 40s and 50s and perhaps beyond in some cases, and a lot of them ultimately became bishops and real leaders and writers, and first one thing and another. Um, but I give thanks for being in a situation where I really had some positive things, and one of the things that they did was they trusted me. I remember being highly complimented one day when we were dealing with a particular issue with one of our colleagues, who was in some trouble in his parish and so forth, a very prominent fellow. Um, and I participated as well did everybody else, kind of processing the stuff with him that he was going through and so forth. We left the meeting, and I remember one guy saying, Frank, you ask good questions. Well, why do I remember that nearly 50 years, over 50 years later? It was because it was such a beautiful, loving gift, just telling me that. And I think he meant it, and I think he was correct. I think I did ask good questions, but
Well, I
it
would
was
say
beside the
that
point.
I would say he more than meant it. And this is where I would say mentoring goes beyond teaching. So
Yeah,
yes, we have, I guess we'd call them mentors. I would call them more like teachers that we, in a sense, professionally and otherwise grow up around. And they help us with very important skill set issues,
yeah,
learning how to do whatever it is that we try, whatever your job is, whatever your profession is. In our case, it was being ordained and trying to do the priestly things that are rather complicated, and they're not always self-evident. And because you're dealing with people, like so many other jobs do, they require a certain nuance, to put it mildly.
right,
But a mentor is somebody who isn't just trying to help you become like them or do it as well as they do it. They're helping you find what is it that's uniquely you. So this guy saying to you, something about you and asking questions is really special. You
yeah,
you you should really pay attention to that, Frank Dunn. You should develop and hone, which by the time I met you, you certainly had done. Frank Dunn had done that. So he would shake his finger and he would say, I'll tell you one thing. And usually, even though you were shaking your finger and saying something, it was a question. You were saying, this is something that has framed my way of organizing information to help me take a next step into an area that may have some real risks. But I'll tell you one thing, I need to step on this stone because that's a stone that I know is going to hold me up while I'm
yeah,
trying to figure out what's the next step I'm supposed to take, right? And
yeah,
those are good. Those are really, they're not just foundational questions. They're not questions I can teach you and say, okay, here's the corpus of questions, Frank, that you should ask, which a lot of people did. I'm clinical trained. So these are the three things you need to ask somebody if they've just had a loss. That's nonsense. I shouldn't say it's nonsense. It's not nonsense. Knowing that corpus of information about grieving, of course, is important. But if you don't know how to listen in your own unique way
yeah,
to somebody else telling you the story of their loss, you can't be a good pastor or a good counselor or a good friend. So you have to learn how to do that in your own way. And a mentor is like a tugboat. They say, okay, look, let's get out there in the deep water. I want you to go visit this person who just lost their spouse. And then I want you to come back and let's talk about it. Now, I'm not going to say, well, you missed the second of the three things you were supposed to do when you. Yeah. No, I mean, now there would be teachers who would do that. So you know what? You get a B-, you don't get an A+. And that was the way I used to run my. I would say, you better believe I want the A+, as opposed to, wow, I had a mentor when I was doing clinical training who said to me one time, because I was visiting this person who was she was on dialysis 3 times a week. She was her physical life was falling apart, and she talked to me about how when she was on dialysis at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital, she was seeing Jesus on the cross, and it freaked me out. I've seen Jesus on the cross with crucifixes, but she would just sit, she would lie there while I visited her while she was on dialysis, and she would say, what gets me through this is what she was saying, I think, was something like, I feel like his being on the cross was like my being in dialysis.
Yeah.
She literally felt at one with the God who knows suffering because God has suffered.
Right. Right.
We can talk about that theology, but she was experiencing it,
right.
And it really scared me. It scared me. So I go back and I do a verbatim, try to the best of my ability to put the words down. She said this.
Right.
I didn't understand why I had to run out of the room. I ran out of the room. I was so scared. And my mentor, the chaplain who was supervising me, said, you were following her so closely and able to listen until you got scared.
Right.
You looked at the waves, right, and you began to sink, just like Peter. Right. I didn't even remember that passage from the Bible. But I said to him, yes. He said, now we have some opportunities to try to understand why.
Oh my God, that's wonderful.
He wasn't trying to teach me how to do grief counseling. He was trying to teach me in my own way, through all the things about me, for good and ill, that made me a good listener and a not so good listener, how to listen better.
Wow.
He was my mentor. He was a tugboat.
I love that metaphor, by the way.
Until you saw the waves.
I love that tugboat image.
Yeah.
I have never thought about that or heard it before, and I've heard a lot from you and others.
The difference between a teacher and a mentor. Because a teacher is particularly these days, teachers will complain and they'll say, all they care about is us getting these students able to pass these nationalized exams. Well, I'm not sure passing a nationalized exam is a bad thing, but it certainly isn't the whole thing. But a lot of teachers will say that's the whole thing. Teaching's a lot more than that, and those teachers know that. They want to do that. I have met very few teachers who aren't conscientious and at least well-intentioned, and usually very good at what they do. But a mentor goes beyond that. So I had, for example, an English teacher who was a mentor. She taught me to love literary narrative. Mm-hmm. She had a gift of letting you read stories and come into this was in a sophomore year, very different from memorizing grammar rules. Mm-hmm. Now I'm in a classroom where we're reading these stories, and she's helping me to see in those stories questions and insights and possibilities I didn't even know could be in those stories. Mrs. Harriman, I remember her. And when I was applying to college, some years later, I went to Mrs. Harriman asking for a recommendation.
Yeah.
And she wrote one paragraph that I still have a copy of it. That is one of the most insightful paragraphs I have ever had written about me. Uh-huh. Because she just had a way of seeing you. And more than that, I would go so far as she believed in me. She believed in me in a way I had never had anybody believe in me before. You can understand some of these mysteries. It was like, and I grew up in the church, so I couldn't have said it that way at that point, but that was what always fascinated me about the church, about the sacraments, the mysteries. So here she is with these stories, and she's like, "Do you see that there are layers of meaning, and
Wow.
why these characters progress the way they do? Why the plot has this arc? How it functions? All these things." Later, I would become an English major in college, and I went back to high school and told Mrs. Harriman, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm going to major in English." And she said, "Oh, I could believe that." She said, I think that is you, Jim. I think
Wow.
that's you."
That's really somebody who knows your soul, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Just like
And
that.
again, she was a good teacher. She was a great teacher,
Yeah.
and we learned a lot of things. But she had, and I would say this. I'd ramble on with some of my classmates, and they would laugh and they'd say, "Well, she does the same thing with us." And I thought, what an extraordinary human being.
Yeah. As you are telling your stories, I'm thinking about a couple of people in my own life that did that kind of thing like that. They both of them were high school teachers. One of them was my English teacher, and she was a lot like Mrs. Harriman. Um, Her name was Evelyn Snyder. And anybody in my generation who came through Conway High School, Conway, South Carolina, probably would recognize the name and have memories of Evelyn Snyder. She was hard. She was demanding. She was exacting. She had a great sense of humor. She was one of these people who never got old. I don't know how old she was, probably in her 50s when she taught me, but I didn't think of her as an old woman. Uh, but but I knew her. I was pleased to know her throughout her life. Well, from high school on, and I would go back to see her, and when I lived near where she lived, then when I was in Connecticut, for example. I remember writing her one time or calling her maybe when I was in Newtown. I'm sidetracking a little bit here, and saying, "Miss Snyder, I've just got to tell you, I just had an experience I thought you might appreciate because when I was in high school, she had four of her students in one class to write a play. She had written herself many stage plays on biblical characters. This was a course in biblical literature, and so she invited us to come in. She said, "This year I want you four to be the ones who author this play because you can do it." And she guided us into how to create dialogue and how to create action and how to create suspense and all of the things that one needs to know if you're doing a play. And the subject of the play was William Tyndale, the translator of the New Testament. And when I was at Trinity, I celebrated the feast of William Tyndale I think it's in October one year. And I called her up and I said, "I had the most wonderful experience today." I'm beginning to choke up as I think about that. I celebrated a Holy Eucharist remembering William Tyndale. And I thought about you the entire time because you taught me about William Tyndale, but you taught me so much more. And every time I'd go back to see her, I would let her. Well, we were confreres at that point, but she never stopped mentoring me, and she still does to this day. I mean, I think of, well, right now I'm studying German. Why am I studying German? And I tell people, "Do you want to go to Germany?" I said, "Well, maybe I don't probably never will get there. It doesn't matter." But I'm studying to keep my mind active. And the first person who actually put that in my head was Evelyn Snyder, who said, "If you're wondering why I'm asking you to learn these 50 lines from Hamlet, it's because you might be old someday, and you might be blind, and you might not be able to read, and you're going to want to remember things. And if you remember these now, you'll never forget them." And sure enough, I do. Well, it's
It's
that's
great.
that's teaching, it's mentoring, but she also knew my soul. And the other guy, in a very different way, was a much younger guy. He was half the age, I guess, of Evan Snyder and twice the age of me. So, he was probably in his 30s, 40s, somewhere at the time. Raymond Thigpen, he came back to Conway and taught music and directed the chorus and so forth. He was fabulous. And everybody ate out of the palm of his hand. And he was another one of these people who would settle for nothing less than the best, but not because he had to achieve it, but because he wanted you to do it, right? So one day I had private lessons with him. I went to sit down at the piano, and I played Bach two-part invention number 4, which I had not practiced. And I butchered it. And he just hung his head the entire time. And he when I finished, he said, "Oh, smoking a cigarette. Frank, that is the worst I have ever heard you play. And that is undoubtedly the worst I have ever heard that invention played." And he didn't do much more than that. He
He
said,
didn't need to.
he said, "Move over, get up." He sat down and he played it for me. He said, "That's the way this thing goes. Learn how to do it." I came back and did it the next time. And, I don't even have a memory of that. All I can remember was his saying, "That is the worst you have ever." He was right. And
But again, it's not to shame you.
uh-uh.
It's to challenge you. It's to say you can do. I know you can do so much better than this. I've never heard you play like this, and stop fooling around. And then he shows you what it is, what the thing is you're fooling around with. And again, rather than feeling shame about that and hanging your head down, you end up being motivated to come back and do it right. And that's more to my again, I don't mean to belabor the point. That's so much more than just teaching.
Yeah, it is. It
That's not
really
just
is.
teaching you how to play the piano, because great pianists do a whole lot more than play the piano. Obviously, at the bare minimum, it's truly an interpretive enterprise. And you have to be able to play the piano. I can't play the piano. You have to play the piano. You have to have the basic skills. But that's the prerequisite of being able to put yourself into that piece of music. And he said, Frank, this piece of music is inviting you into a relationship which you have just desecrated. And you go, yeah, I'm not,
Well,
I'm not going to again.
he did something else, and I didn't recognize this at the time. But I'm gonna be honest and say I'm full of bullshit, and I always have been. And everybody else is either. Did you ever read that little book on bullshit by
I
Harry
have.
Frankfurt?
Yep,
It's
yep.
it's a philosophical treatise, right? Princeton philosopher. But
That was one of the books on the book list for the American Leadership Forum.
well, he was
It's
exactly right.
really
But
about
it
leadership.
took me a long time to learn. And I later on after this whole kind of thing, I had some experiences where I had to learn you cannot just breeze through life and not do
Right.
anything and so on. And he was calling me out for being shallow, but he was also calling me out for it wasn't
Not
lying
being
in the sense of
insecure.
fabricating a truth, but I came in there and instead of saying, "Look, I just haven't practiced this week. I really can't do this well," I sat down and tried to fake it, and I think he didn't say, "Well, you liar," anything like that, but he called me out on it. He called me out
Or
on it.
even go so far as to say, you're wasting my time and yours.
Yeah,
That became obvious.
yeah.
I had an English teacher my freshman year. They changed all the rules of Trinity. You didn't have to do these prerequisite courses, but I decided I would because I thought I was going to go to law school. I looked at the old curriculum and I said, I'm going to take literature and rhetoric. Well, every Friday you handed in a paper. I hand in a paper, which I did Thursday night, like I always did my papers. Monday, you'd get it back. I get it back. It's a C. I can't believe it. I haven't gotten a C. I don't know in how long. So I run to the professor's office and I had to make an appointment. I mean, he saw me that afternoon. This is a 9 o'clock class. How can I help you, Mr. Kowalski? I said, well, Mr. Risden, I don't know what's wrong with my paper. Well, let me look at it, he said. Oh, yes, I remember this paper. He said, sir, Mr. Kowalski, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this paper. It's perfectly average.
Ah!
Well, he didn't have to, and I left. I got some distance toward my dorm and I burst into tears. And then just before I arrived at my dorm, I kind of came to my senses and I thought, well, what the hell were you expecting? I mean, this isn't some party anymore. You're now in college. You wrote a paper the night before. What did you think you were going to get? Well, in high school, I used to, I could talk, if the teachers didn't give me an A, I could talk them into giving me an A. So it didn't work that way anymore. Well, when I got to my room, I started to prepare my next paper that would be due on Friday. This was more Monday afternoon, and I started to. That's not just teaching, and that's not the same thing as saying you just have to memorize this grammar or you're kicked out. And then I, for the whole semester, two things happened. He slowly gave me better grades as my papers I think got better, but he had my number and he had boy I was chasing him. And eventually I got an A minus in the course, which I consider one of my great achievements in life. But he contacted me after the second paper and he said, I want to have you come to my office once a week. And we're going to study together the primer of pronunciation. And I had no idea what he's talking about. But when I came to the office, he had this little book and it was all just a collection of words, often mispronounced. And he said, I want you to graduate from here a gentleman. And I can tell that your preparation has not been as good as many of the students who went to private schools. And he spent an hour every week with me. Now, at first I thought he was insulting me, but then it became clear to me he was investing in me.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing about breaking the isolation by asking for help is you begin to realize there are people out there who would be delighted to be asked to be your mentor because they would like to make an investment in you.
Oh,
Again, you
golly.
want to find somebody who likes you or sees something in you or whatever, has made some indication that either they think what you're trying to do is worthwhile or they think who you are is has potential, whatever indications you're getting, or sometimes you just have to take the risk and ask somebody that you hope might feel that way. But mentors are interesting people. I've gotten to mentor or supervise people as a mentor in field education and whatnot. And it gives you an opportunity to invest in somebody else. Again, not to make them over in your own image, not to help them become like you, but to help them become what they're meant to be.
And that's that. Well, all of this really, to frame it in a somewhat larger context, to my mind, it really is about how to exercise love. And I don't mean romantic love. Of course, I don't. I would hope that would be obvious that there's different shades of love, different values, different brands, different levels, and so on. But if I the people who have allowed me, and they haven't been everybody that came my way or that I tried to be available to, but the people who've allowed me to love them, to not wanting out of that love to impart knowledge or whatever, but to respect them and so forth. I think probably if you and I really got down to brass tacks, I think we would ultimately be saying, you know what? When I went to Newtown and you were in Newtown and we were together, we learned to love each other. And like all love relationships, of course it had its shadows and its tests and its bumps and all that kind of thing like that. Freeing one of those things doesn't necessarily negate love or make it.
Right.
Um, but
And I think you also, when you show up, and it wasn't easy, and things were at times rocky for you and me, but most of the time when we were able to do what you're talking about, to love one another, we were tapping into a reality that we both had somehow, by some mysterious spirit, been sent to that place and to be there at the same time and to be part of a creative process, that we wanted to be there for that parish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, even though I may have felt, well, what entitles this guy to be the rector and I'm supposed to be the curate? Well, the truth is, it was pretty obvious. You were more experienced than I. You also got elected to be the rector. But, if I got myself into a snit about that, none of that mattered. It's like, who's he to come in here and, be in charge or something, as opposed to how is it that in this mysterious way, two people so different in some ways, similar in other ways, but very different people, certainly from different backgrounds and everything, we're suddenly dropped into this funny little place called Newtown, Connecticut, and being asked to help this parish be the body of Christ, or a church, or a community. Again, you don't have to use religious language.
No.
We could be talking about two people who are asked to be leaders of a political entity, or two people who are running a school or running a company. Why are the two of us now being charged with this responsibility? And how are we together supposed to be part of that creative process? And,
Right.
and that may sound odd if you're coming from a business perspective. The great business leaders I've gotten to know, and I've gotten to know a lot of them. I mean, one of my best mentors when I was in New York was a guy named Jack Rudin. The Rudin family is renowned for its real estate investment. I mean, these are real estate people,
Mm-hmm.
and they love the city of New York. They've given millions and millions and millions of dollars to help the city of New York. Jack just befriended me. And he would say, "Kid, show up. Can you come early and have coffee with me before that meeting?" I said, "Jack, I'll go anywhere for you." And I mean, it was absurd. Jack Rudin asking me to come early to the Hilton because there was going to be this big thing. And I'd get there 15 minutes early. He'd already be there, sitting at a table by himself. He said, "Go get a cup of coffee and have a seat." So we'd be chatting. Everybody in New York who came to that meeting walked by that table to say hi to Jack Rudin. No surprise, but Jack Rudin introduced me to everybody who came to say hi to him. He would take me to the Four Seasons. He would take me to the Carlisle. Every time somebody would come over to see Jack Rudin, who was like, there wasn't anybody in the city of New York didn't know Jack Rudin. Mayors, former mayors. I mean, they all would come over and say, "Hey, Jack, he said, do you know the dean of the cathedral?" A couple of times when he did it, I started laughing. He said, "What's so funny, kid?" I said, "Well, why in the hell would they know me?" He said, "Well, they're gonna."
Wow.
That's
That's
unbelievable. I mean, what the generosity. I said to him, why do you do this? Why do you bother being so generous to me? He said, "Because I think you have an opportunity to do something great for this city, which I love."
that puts me on the edge of tears. I
Yeah,
had no idea that
me
this was going to be
too.
such an
Me
emotional kind
too.
of thing. Well, yeah, if that's not
And
if
I
that
felt that way about you at Trinity, about us at Trinity. To the opportunities to be part of creation. That's what you were saying. I moved to
yeah.
say this because of what you were saying about love.
Exactly, and if Ruden's experience with you is not an experience of love, I don't know what is. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's and another flag. I am forever saying. In fact, we're going to be having a podcast on this subject, maybe next time, but soon. I'm going to have somebody in here who's an artist, um, and my whole reason for doing that is to say you may not be creative in the way that you think people are creative, but each one of us, if we're human and if we're alive, if we're breathing, we have got some creative energy in us, and it's the same creative energy by which we ourselves were created, and it's the same. It's what powers procreation, certainly, and anything that attaches to that, it seems to me. And so I think we're
Yeah.
talking about
And,
mentoring,
and
but
I think the other thing, it's the challenge, even if you can't do art, whatever that means, to be an artist is to see things more clearly as they are,
yeah,
but also to dare to imagine what they could be.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
everybody, every one of us needs to be an artist like that,
Yeah,
to see
exactly.
things more clearly and then to imagine what they could be. And great mentors see that about us, but great mentoring creates leadership to be a part of that enterprise,
Right.
which is the only way you actually. I mean, what I loved about being in Newtown together was we were building community. We were doing youth services in Newtown. We were doing all kinds of things for kids and for adults and helping elderly people and kids that were in crisis and all kinds of stuff. And then most of all, our responsibility was to build up that congregation. Some people may not care. They say, I don't, why would I even care about? I don't even go to church. Okay. But that church was a force for good.
Yeah, you're right
It's
about
part
that.
of a creative enterprise in Newtown, and we helped to shape that.
We've been talking for quite a little while now, but we've got a little bit more time. I want to raise one other thing, and maybe you have some other things you want to say as well. But I want to talk about distant mentors, the people who we have never known personally, people who are we've known through books or we've known through other media. Um, who are the people that we've never actually been mentored by personally, but yet whose ideas, whose lives have inspired us, and so on? Everybody has heroes, almost everybody. Mine, when I was in high school, was Abraham Lincoln. I was a little Southern boy who thought that Lincoln was. I mean, all of my peers, not all of them, but many of them were enamored of Jack Kennedy. And at that point in my life, I couldn't relate to Kennedy, but I could relate to Lincoln. And there's still things that Lincoln said that he did that continue to inspire me, move me, challenge me, etc. Who are some people for you?
Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, oddly, one of the, and I've been thinking about him a lot lately, is Lyndon Johnson. For some reason, and I was devastated when he announced, even though I, by that time, had decided I really didn't support the Vietnam War. I started out, like a lot of teenagers, supporting it, and I had a lot of friends who went to Vietnam. But by the time Lyndon Johnson said he would not run and wouldn't accept the nomination, I was in tears that night. I listened to his broadcast. The thing about these heroes and these famous people that we only know from a distance, the two people who've become incredibly important to me are Doris Kearns Goodwin and John Meacham, because their way of, and also I guess Ken Burns in a different kind of way through his documentaries, the information we're now getting about these people, it's not that they had clay feet or that they're not perfect. It's that we can understand that they're a lot more like us than we might imagine, which means we could be a lot more like the heroic part of them that we idolize, but we don't have to idolize it. We don't have to. It's just like if you make Jesus too divine, he can't be human enough to be one of us. Uh,
Exactly.
and then how do I become more Christ-like? I just can't believe that I'm ever going to be very divine, but maybe I could follow Jesus as a role model. But he has to be human enough, and I think some of the distant role models or distant mentors or people of history, I was idolizing so much I forgot that they're regular. And so I've read a lot about Lyndon Johnson. I mean, Lyndon Johnson had a checkered past, and he had his own flaws. And I mean, it wasn't just that he could pick up dogs by their ears and stuff, and gallivant with women, or basically attack a lot of the women in his office, even at the White House and whatnot. But what made it possible for that odd guy from such a background? Um, Now it's the same. I mean, he was the congressperson for the area that right now is so wildly flooded in Texas.
Hmm.
What he did for Texas, what he did for the country, what he did in passing civil rights legislation. Um, how did he become that person? I
I've
mean, because
often wondered that myself, and I probably should read a good biography of Johnson. Who,
there are
as
some
you say,
excellent ones now, yeah, and all of these are. I mean, so much we're learning, and people. I don't know if it's that people are telling the stories better, or we're more honest, or we just have better access to this information. I don't know what it is, but we have windows into the humanity of these people. And then, as John Meacham would say, how do you bring out the better angels, as Lincoln would say?
tell us a little bit about Doris Kearns Goodwin and Meacham. What
Well,
about?
well, you mentioned Lincoln. I think if you were to read Doris Kearns Goodwin's works about Lincoln, um, she and or just hear listen to, you can get her on YouTube, you can listen to her on the TV all the time. She tells such riveting stories about how Lincoln was, among other things, ravaged by depression,
Mhm.
and yet somehow he came to terms with this horrible civil war and began, and some of the way he did it, in my opinion, he came to believe that we had to fight a bloody war. It was the only way we could end up with the right country. Because it was just so devastating to him to realize that President of the United States, as the whole thing could come undone. And John Meacham, well, one of his most recent books is about George Herbert Walker Bush.
Mhm.
And basically, he takes this approach of how did this patrician guy of this supercharged patriarchal Connecticut wealth family go? He decides to move to Texas, and he becomes the head of this great political, family. I just find Meacham and Kearns are historians. There are many others too
Mhm.
who give us insight into human nature at this kind of highest level, so to speak. That we often would say some of these were true heroes of just taking American history. You could go all over the world. You go across time. We're
Yeah.
learning so much more about these characters of history, so that we can ask some really good questions about what does it take to learn to be a leader, or to put it in a theological context, how do you become a person for others?
Yeah.
How do you overcome these flaws of human nature, which cause us to be selfish or egotistical? And now I think we've got so many leaders who are getting so much attention, who are, I don't know what they're among, this is my opinion, they're among some of the most insecure and troubled individuals I think I've ever seen
Oh yeah.
on the public stage. But I'm not sure that's what distinguishes them, because under the right set of circumstances, I could behave like that too. Sometimes I have behaved like they do, but I don't have the responsibilities that they have to try to say, if I think I want more than anything else to get revenge, I'm going to stop what I'm doing until I can straighten myself out and get back in touch with what my job really is. If all I care about is getting even with you, or taking you down, or having you incarcerated, I mean, or lying about, this is just insanity. And we have to come to our senses, not in saying there's something terribly wrong with these people. I think there may well be, but we expect of our leaders that they put those things aside. That we say, mentors help us look inside and say,
Well, there
I
you
have,
go.
I have these same issues. I could be like that. How do I decide I want to be this other kind of person I also can be?
Well, in other words, we have some choices to make about who we are. I want to segue from that into one other thing, and then I think this probably is a good place to land. Back in the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned about uh, in the context of the anecdote I told about the other priest saying to me, "You ask good questions," um, and this is not to elaborate on my asking good questions particularly, but it is about asking questions. It's about being open. Um, and I haven't always done a good job of that. I can look back over, oh my God, I could beat myself up if I wanted to. I choose not to, but I can be honest and say I can look at so many things that I wish I had done differently as a parent, as a pastor, or as a neighbor, or as a whatever role I'm in, or relationship I happen to be have been in. Um, but there was one thing that happened fairly late in my career that helped me identify that. There are two things actually. Um, One of them was when I went to Washington. Within a very short period of time, I got involved with Washington Interfaith Network, and I was never a leader in that organization. I always had issues around time management and so forth, so I didn't really do that. But I did something that I'm very glad I did, and I wrote about it not long ago in the context of the blog, I guess that I do, and that is I learned by doing the Saul Alinsky inspired training that Washington Interfaith Network did because it was Industrial Areas Foundation uh, linked organization. I learned that the skills of pastoral care and counseling are precisely the skills of community organizing. And you know what they amount to? Listening. They amount to listening, but listening for the purpose of finding out where people are angry, where they are dissatisfied, where they are hurting, where they have issues, where they're frustrated, because those kinds of things, Alinsky said, and the people who followed him have found to be true. Those kinds of things are the kinds of things that can transmute anger. Uh, I'm saying it wrong. Those are the kinds of things that can contribute to the building up of anger, or with the right kind of context, can transmute that anger into creative change. That was one thing, and it really had to do with listening. And and the other thing has to do again with that same listening skill. When I was again at St. Stephen in the Incarnation, for the first time in my life, beginning with you, um, I had a string of people through the years that were in deacons in training, or were people who, in some position or other, were dependent upon me for guidance. Uh, I didn't mean to say that you were particularly, because I think we had a different kind of arrangement entirely, but deacons in training and seminarians and so on. Well, I had a seminarian at St. Stephen in the Incarnation for the first time in years. They'd had one. And the program that I was involved with at Virginia Seminary insisted, it was not an option, that supervisors undergo, get this, a 3-year level of training to be supervisors. And at first I thought, oh God, I don't need this. I've been at this stuff for nearly 40 years now. Why, well, was I ever wrong? A guy by the name of Jack Hadler, a priest at Virginia Seminary, ran this program, and it was an absolutely fantastic experience because it gathered supervisors in small groups. And we would talk about various topics and so on. But you know what the skill was I learned late in the game? Don't impart information. Ask questions. And that incident that you gave about, what was that fellow's name? Walt, the supervisor, and we probably shouldn't be talking about people's first names, but anyway, your supervisor in clinical training, the skill that he had.
Bill Leach.
Okay. The skill that he was employing when he had that conversation with you was precisely what I finally learned to do better myself. Or maybe I learned really to do, not just better, but maybe I just learned it for the first time.
And realize that's just letting that be what you do. That's being present.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the other side of it, lest we forget, is the mentee
Yeah.
has to be open to that. They
Yeah.
have to be willing to share. They have to be willing to listen. Not listen in the sense that you're going to tell them what to do and they better listen and then they better do it. That's not even good teaching. But they have to be able to go inside and listen,
Yeah.
because Alinsky maybe wouldn't say it exactly this way, but what Alinsky's really saying, I think, for me, what it means is, if you can't help people get in touch with what are becoming impediments to solving the problem, they're not going to become part of the solution. And community organizing and pastoral counseling, if I don't realize that I am sabotaging myself in this relationship, even if the other person is trying to change what I claim are the behaviors or the circumstances that are so aggravating to me, if I'm not willing to go inside myself and take responsibility, that is, to be able to respond. Responsibility is the ability to respond, which also means in a different way. If I can't go inside and be open to changes, it's not just the mentor that has to do that, it's the person being mentored.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when I think what was unusual about our relationship is that it was never it was never entirely clear who was the mentor and who was the mentee. We didn't care that much about that. We treated each other as colleagues who were committed to the same thing. And that doesn't mean that if we were candid to each other, we might not at times get very upset. I remember giving you feedback after some vestry meetings where you got very upset with me, but you were mostly upset with yourself. You used to, I remember one time I said, why did you say that to that person? That person's daughter just had this or that. And you said, you don't understand because you've never been a rector, but people just take what I say too damn seriously. I say, well, yeah, they do. This guy sure did, right? And it was an innocent kind of thing after a very tumultuous encounter with this guy, and eventually we worked that out because you weren't seeing me as this insubordinate, which I wasn't insubordinate, but I wasn't being insubordinate to you. I was actually trying to help.
Well, yeah, and in retrospect, I can see that. I just was a dumbass in some ways.
Well, the point you made before is that we all can be some of the time.
Well,
And
yeah, exactly.
That's what I get from Doris Kearns and Goodwin and John Meacham. I got to know John Meacham when I was in New York. I'll tell you a funny little story about John Meacham, which he used to come to the University Club a lot, and we were in the fitness center together. And in the fitness center, if you swim or when you go to take a shower, you have to go through the same area. Whether swimming or taking a shower, it's only men in that part of the club, and you don't wear any clothes. And so he introduced me one time at an event to his wife, and he said, "This is the dean of the cathedral, Jim Kowalski. I recognize him better when he doesn't have his clothes on." His wife looked at him and said, "John, would you just please stop doing that?" But he's actually a very, very, very funny guy. And
I love that.
Listened to him or read his stuff, he's also very smart and very serious. But she looked at him, and I didn't know what she was going to say, but she just shook her head. She said, "Will you just stop? Will you just stop?"
Well, you know what? I think we've got to end this, and that's a good thing to say is, you know what? This really is about being human. I said it a little while ago. It's really about love. Well, same thing. It really is just
the isolation. Thinking somehow or another, I'm not. It's okay for you to be human, or you're less human than I am because you get it right more often than I do, or you're smarter than. And so I can't ask for help.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here
It's been
today.
fun.
This has been fun and it has been very rich. And you did exactly what I expected you to do, which you mentored me and how to have a
Oh, the feeling is,
conversation.
as always, the feeling is mutual.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, and thank you who've listened to Frank Words today. Some podcast sites carry transcripts of the conversation. So check to see if you can access a transcript if you want to review some points that we've made or note some of the resources or uh, follow up on some of the names that we've referred to. If you're viewing the video version of this on YouTube, you'll see in the frames that follow in the video references to my website, a bit about the blog that I mentioned in passing in this podcast, which I moderate called Angels and Principalities, with a focus on examining the crossroads where faith and politics meet and sometimes collide. Be sure to sign up on your favorite podcast site to be notified when a new podcast is released about every couple of weeks, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're not on YouTube now, it is youtube.com/Frank Dunn 450, 450. youtube.com/Frank Dunn 450. I'm always glad and grateful to hear from any of you when you shoot your questions, suggestions, and observations to me, including how the podcast might serve you better. So contact me at frankgdunn@gmail.com. That's probably the easiest one to remember. frankgdunn@gmail.com. Not Frank Dunn. That's YouTube. frankgdunn@gmail.com. So see you next time. And until then, remember to do the best you can to speak your own truth in frank words.